Sherlock Holmes and the Mystery of the Man Who Did Not Exist. Chapter 1. The Unexpected Invitation. Some cases begin with a dead body. Some begin with an accusation. But this strange case began with a question: how can a man die if he never existed? A thick grey fog blanketed London that morning. The clinking of knives and forks against fine porcelain echoed in the warm sitting room of 221B Baker Street, where I, Dr. John Watson, was enjoying a late breakfast while reading the Times. As usual, Holmes stood by the window, pipe in hand, his keen eyes watching the hurried crowd below. The quiet was broken when Mrs. Hudson entered, carrying an ivory-colored envelope, which she placed on the table. "A letter for you, Mr. Holmes." I glanced at it. It bore none of the elaborate seals of the aristocracy or government. In fact, there was no sender's name at all. Holmes picked up the envelope, raising an eyebrow. An anonymous letter? He tore it open and pulled out the note inside. There was only a single line, but it made the entire room feel heavy. "A man has died, but he never existed. Help me, Mr. Holmes." Holmes remained silent for a few seconds, his eyes locked onto the words as if analyzing every stroke of ink. Then, he looked up, a glint of excitement mixed with challenge in his gaze. "Watson, do you notice anything unusual?" I set my newspaper down, frowning. That is indeed a puzzling statement. A man has died, but never existed? If he never existed, how could he have died? Precisely. Holmes chuckled, tossing the letter onto the table. A perfect paradox. And paradoxes always stimulate my intellect. He walked over to his desk, examining the paper carefully. "Watson, do you notice anything about the handwriting?" I picked up the note for a closer look. The handwriting was elegant, with a clear contrast between thick and thin strokes, evidence of someone well-educated. But what struck me the most was, "This is a woman's handwriting." Holmes nodded in satisfaction. "Very good. Not only that, but she writes with a light pressure, suggesting a cautious, reserved personality. However, there is something strange." He held the paper up to the light, his brows furrowing. "The ink has been dry for quite some time. This letter was not written this morning, it was likely prepared in advance. The question is, why send it now?" Holmes lit his pipe, pacing the room. "A man has died, but never existed. That could mean three things. He once existed but was erased from all records. He lived under a false identity. He never officially existed on any documentation." I frowned. If it's the third possibility, that means, this person had no birth certificate, no papers, and no one officially knew he existed. Exactly. And that makes this case special. A man who never existed, yet someone is asking us to investigate his death. Holmes held the letter up to eye level, deep in thought, then suddenly turned to me. "We must find out who sent this letter. And if I am not mistaken, tonight, we shall have a most interesting encounter." A shiver ran down my spine, not from the cold, but from the feeling that this case would lead us into a mystery unlike any we had faced before. Chapter 2. The Meeting in the Dark. There are meetings people look forward to, meetings people fear, and meetings where one cannot predict whether they will return with answers, or never return at all. The cold London night was like a thin blade, cutting through even the thickest coats. The streetlights cast long shadows, but as we left the city center and entered the outskirts, the light gradually faded, surrendering to the darkness. Holmes and I stepped down from the carriage onto a gravel road, where not a single soul passed by. Before us stood an abandoned house, silent and still, like a mute witness to things that should never be known. I pulled my coat tighter and looked around. "An ideal place for an ambush, Holmes." Holmes smiled, as if my words only made him more intrigued. "Or an ideal place to hide the truth." We climbed the worn steps. Holmes pushed lightly against the rotting wooden door. It was unlocked, but the hinges let out a long, creaking groan, like a lament for the secrets within. The room was pitch dark, except for a small oil lamp placed on a dust-covered table. In the dim light, a figure sat upright, waiting. The woman was dressed in a long black gown, wearing lace gloves, her face concealed behind a dark veil. Holmes stepped forward, his voice calm. "I am Sherlock Holmes. And this is Dr. Watson." The woman nodded, as if she had expected us. "I don't have much time, Mr. Holmes." Her voice was low, slightly trembling. A tremor of fear, or of grief. "I am My husband, Arthur Winslow, has been murdered." Holmes studied her intently. "And you want me to find the one who killed him?" She took a deep breath. "Not just that. I need you to find something more important than the murderer." "What is it?" She clasped her gloved hands tightly. "His existence." I frowned, but Holmes showed no surprise. He walked a slow circle around the room, as if assessing the very air before deciding whether to believe anything at all. "Arthur Winslow. I have tried to search for that name, but there is nothing. No birth certificate, no identification, no family, no records of any kind. Legally speaking, your husband never existed." The woman nodded slightly. "That is precisely the problem." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper, placing it on the table. I looked down. It was a letter, handwritten carefully. "If you receive this letter, it means I am dead. Do not believe anything they say. I do not exist, but the truth does. Find Mr. Holmes." Holmes lifted the letter, examining it under the oil lamp. "The ink is fairly fresh, perhaps written within the past week. But what intrigues me is, who killed him?" The woman shuddered. "I don't know. All I know is that yesterday morning, I was informed that my husband had died. But when I arrived, no one could provide any information about him. No body, no investigation report, nothing." She lifted her head, her voice almost desperate. "Do you understand, Mr. Holmes? It's as if he never existed." Holmes slowly set the letter down. "But you were married to him, weren't you?" "Yes." "And you have a marriage certificate?" "No." Her answer startled me. "No? What do you mean?" "I never saw our marriage certificate. He told me it had been processed, but I was never required to sign anything. I trusted him." Holmes smirked. "Interesting." He sat across from her, his fingers interlaced, eyes fixed on the veil covering her face. How long have you known Arthur Winslow?" 3 years. "And in those 3 years, you never suspected anything?" She was silent for a long moment before replying. "I did. But I loved him." The simplicity of that answer carried a weight of its own. Holmes glanced at me, as if silently telling me to remember this. Then he continued. "Did you know what your husband did for a living?" "He said he worked in finance. But I never saw him go to work." "And you never met his friends or colleagues?" She shook her head. "He said he had no friends." Holmes smiled, as if that response only confirmed his suspicions. "You know, there are 2 types of people who have no friends. One is someone who is truly solitary. The other is someone who cannot afford to have anyone know their past. And I have a feeling your husband belongs to the latter category." I looked at the woman before me, and for the first time, I saw her shoulders tremble slightly. "Then, who was my husband?" Holmes was silent for a moment. "That is what I intend to find out. But first, I need something." "What?" "His fingerprints." The woman looked up, surprised. I don't have them. No personal belongings. No document he ever signed. I have his notebook." She pulled a small notebook from her coat pocket. Holmes flipped through the pages, his eyes lighting up as he spotted something of interest. At the bottom of one page, there was a smudge of ink, as if someone had accidentally touched it before it dried. Holmes took out his magnifying glass, examining it carefully. "Thank you, M. You have just given me something invaluable." The woman looked at him, her eyes, hidden behind the veil, glimmering with a faint hope. "You will help me, won't you, Mr. Holmes?" Holmes stood, slipping the notebook into his coat. "I do not believe in things that do not exist. But I do believe in things that are hidden. And I promise you, I will find Arthur Winslow, whoever he may be." The night remained dark as we left the abandoned house. But I knew this case had only just begun. Chapter 3: The Nameless Corpse. Nothing is colder than an unidentified body lying between four stone walls, forgotten by both the living and the dead. London's sky was dark and overcast as Holmes and I stepped down from the carriage in front of the central morgue. The damp air, heavy with mist, made the atmosphere even more oppressive. The gatekeeper, a short, weary-eyed old man, recognized Holmes immediately and pulled open the heavy iron door without a word. Inside, the flickering oil lamps cast long shadows across the gray stone floor. Dr. Mortimer, the forensic pathologist, was waiting for us. A thin man with sharp eyes, he was no stranger to the strange cases Holmes had investigated. "I knew you'd come, Holmes." Holmes gave a faint smile, removing his gloves and setting his hat on the table. "I was hoping you would, Mortimer. Show me the body." Dr. Mortimer nodded and led us to the inner room, where the dead lay in silence on metal tables. He pulled back a white sheet, revealing the corpse of a man. I couldn't suppress a shudder. The man appeared to be middle-aged, his face angular but gaunt. His dark brown hair was still matted, perhaps from rain or blood. A gunshot wound was visible on his chest, directly over his heart, with dried blood surrounding it. Holmes folded his arms, leaning in to examine the body closely. "Shot at close range. I'd estimate no more than 5 feet. Dr. Mortimer nodded. "Exactly. The bullet is still inside, and I believe it came from a medium-caliber revolver. But there's something unusual." Holmes looked up. "Tell me." Dr. Mortimer pointed to the pale skin on the victim's wrist. No signs of struggle. No bruises on the arms or hands. If he had been attacked suddenly, there would typically be defensive wounds, raising his hands to shield himself or some instinct to resist. But here, there's nothing. I frowned. So he didn't fight back. Either he had no time to, or, Holmes glanced at Mortimer, he was killed somewhere else and brought here. Dr. Mortimer pressed his lips together. Exactly. There wasn't enough blood at the scene where the police found the body. If a person is shot in the heart, the blood loss is extensive, yet on the street where he was discovered, there was only a small stain. Holmes gently lifted the man's hands, turning them over to examine the fingers. "This is interesting." I stepped closer to look. The man's fingers had light calluses, but what stood out was the darkened stains on his middle and index fingers, as if he had spent long hours holding a pen. Holmes nodded to himself. He was a writer. I glanced at Holmes. A novelist, perhaps? Or a scholar? A researcher, maybe? Holmes looked at Dr. Mortimer. "Did you find anything in his clothing?" Dr. Mortimer shook his head. "No identification, no documents. Nothing that could reveal who he was. Only a small piece of paper in his coat pocket." From a drawer, he retrieved a small, water-stained scrap of paper, sealed inside a plastic pouch. Holmes took it carefully and unfolded it. The handwriting was smudged but still legible. "Find the third notebook." Holmes read the words over and over, his eyes glinting with sharp intensity. "The third notebook," I murmured. "But where are the first and second?" Holmes didn't answer immediately. He held the paper up to the light, as if hoping to find some hidden clue. Dr. Mortimer watched us, his voice slow and measured. I've been a forensic examiner for years, but I've never seen a case like this. A dead man with no identity, no past. Holmes tucked the paper into his coat pocket. No, Mortimer. Everyone has an identity. This man's identity has simply been erased. I looked down at the nameless corpse once more. So the real question is, why would someone want to erase him? Holmes nodded. And we will find that answer. But first, we need to know who he truly was. I pulled my coat tighter as a chill ran down my spine. I had followed Holmes through many cases, but I had a feeling that this one would be unlike any we had faced before. Holmes picked up his gloves and turned to me. Let's go, Watson. It's time to find out who this nameless man was, and who wanted him to disappear. The night outside remained as dark as ever, like a curtain concealing the secrets that waited to be uncovered. Chapter 4, The Secret Within the Lines. Every case begins with a question, but this one began with an answer no one yet understood. As Holmes and I stepped out of the morgue, the London fog had grown even thicker, as if the city itself was trying to conceal a mystery that only the boldest dared to uncover. I pulled my coat collar higher, though I knew that what sent chills through me wasn't the cold, it was what we had just witnessed, a nameless corpse, an erased identity, and a cryptic message. Holmes suddenly halted, causing me to nearly bump into his back. Where are we going now? I asked, my mind still lingering on the dead man. Holmes pulled the small slip of paper from his coat and held it up under the dim glow of the street lamp. The scrawled writing became clearer. Before I disappear, find the third notebook. Watson, what do you think of this message? I frowned. I think it's a dying man's final clue, but he doesn't specify where this third notebook is or what it contains. Holmes smiled. Exactly. But more importantly, if there is a third notebook, then there must be a first and a second. And that means we need to find the first two notebooks first. I blurted out. Holmes nodded approvingly. Precisely. A person wouldn't refer to a third notebook unless the first two existed. This suggests that these notebooks are connected and likely contain the truth about the dead man's identity. I looked at the paper again. But something puzzles me. Why didn't he mention the first and second notebooks in his message? Holmes was silent for a few moments before responding. Because he either assumed we already knew where they were, or he feared that someone else might find them. His words sent a shiver down my spine. If this man had died because of a secret hidden in the third notebook, then his killer was probably searching for it too. And if we weren't careful, we might become the next targets. The words of the dead. Holmes decided that our first step in locating the missing notebooks was to return to the one place where we might find a clue, the deceased's residence. However, there was a major problem. This man had no identity, no documents, no official address. But Holmes always had his own ways of uncovering the truth. We returned to 221B Baker Street, where Holmes spent over an hour seated at his desk, studying the slip of paper under the lamp's glow. I dared not disturb him, knowing that his mind was piecing together fragments of a puzzle I couldn't yet see. Finally, he abruptly stood up. Watson, we have a place to go. Where? An old bookstore on St. James Street. I blinked. Why a bookstore? Holmes lifted the slip of paper and pointed to a smudged ink stain in the corner. This stain isn't from an ordinary pen. It's printing ink, the type used by publishing houses. So you're saying this man had connections to a bookstore or a publishing house. And I know just the place that might lead us to some answers. An old bookstore and a new mystery. The bookstore Holmes referred to was nestled in a narrow alley, far removed from the city's bustling streets. As we stepped inside, the air smelled of aged paper, and towering shelves lined with books reached up to the ceiling, coated in a thin layer of dust. An elderly man, wearing small round spectacles, sat behind the counter, eyeing us with suspicion. "What can I do for you, gentlemen?" Holmes stepped forward, pulling out the slip of paper and placing it on the counter. "Have you seen this type of ink before?" The old man squinted, picked up the paper, then exhaled sharply. "I know it. This is the ink we use for certain, special prints." Holmes smirked. "Good. And I believe a man visited you recently regarding a printing job. Someone with the habit of writing a great deal." The old man suddenly tensed. I'm not sure I can help you." Holmes leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "You don't have to lie. I know this man worked with you, and I also know that you are afraid because of it. But you don't need to fear me. The one you should truly fear is the man who killed him." The bookseller's face turned pale. "His name was Henry Blackwood." I stiffened. "Henry Blackwood?" "But the woman told us her husband's name was Arthur Winslow." Holmes nodded. "A false identity, just as I suspected." The bookseller glanced around nervously before lowering his voice. "Henry came here to print an important set of documents. He said they would expose the truth about a secret organization. But before I could finish the job, he disappeared." A chill ran down my spine. "And those documents, where are they now?" The old man swallowed hard. "They are, in the form of notebooks." Holmes smiled. "Take a guess, Watson." I held my breath. "The first and second notebooks." The bookseller nodded shakily. "They're still here. But if you take them, I fear the people who killed Henry won't stop until they get to you." Holmes lifted the slip of paper, his eyes glinting. "I won't take them. Not yet. I want the killer to believe they are still here. In the meantime, I will find the third notebook." The cold London night remained thick and heavy, but I knew we had just taken a step closer to the truth. A truth we might not yet be ready to face. Chapter 5, The One Who Knows the Truth. There are names that bring nostalgia, names that bring sorrow, and names that evoke such fear that no one dares to utter them. London remained shrouded in thick fog as Holmes and I stepped down from the carriage onto a narrow alleyway. The gas lamps cast dim light on the aged walls, making everything around us seem blurred, like a painting smeared by time. "This is it, Watson," Holmes murmured, his gaze fixed on a dark wooden door nestled between the old buildings. Above the door, a faded wooden sign bore the inscription, "Gregory's Bookshop, Rare and Antique Texts." I couldn't help but wonder, if these books could speak, what stories would they tell? Holmes pushed the door open, and I followed closely behind. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of old paper. Towering bookshelves reached the ceiling, crammed with volumes that had likely remained untouched for years. A flickering oil lamp cast dim light over a worn wooden counter, where an elderly man sat hunched over a leather-bound book. He did not look up when we entered, but I noticed his thin hands tightening slightly around the book's edge. Holmes wasted no time. He strode straight to the counter and spoke in a low, firm voice. "Mr. Gregory, I would like to ask you about a man named Arthur Winslow." The moment the name left his lips, the old man froze. Under the dim glow of the oil lamp, I saw the color drain from his face. The air in the room grew heavy. Slowly, Mr. Gregory lifted his head. His eyes, magnified by thick spectacles, met Holmes's with undisguised fear. That man should not exist. His voice trembled, as if merely speaking the name was dangerous. Holmes raised an eyebrow but kept his tone even. And yet, he did exist, at least, until he was murdered. Gregory shook his head vehemently. "No, you don't understand. He was never supposed to exist. Holmes calmly placed one hand on the counter, his gaze piercing through the old man's hesitation. "Mr. Gregory, I believe you know more than you wish to admit. But I need the truth. If you do not speak now, I assure you, the one who killed Arthur Winslow will return, for you." Gregory swallowed hard, visibly shaken. "You shouldn't be investigating this case. I warn you, stop before it's too late." I exchanged glances with Holmes. A warning like this could only mean one of two things: either Gregory was truly terrified, or he knew something that could put his life in danger. Holmes leaned in slightly, his voice soft but weighted with meaning. "Mr. Gregory, I can protect you. But first, you must help me." The old man hesitated, his expression shifting between fear and reluctant resolve. Finally, after what seemed like an internal battle, he sighed deeply and whispered, "Fine. But if I die because of this, it will be your fault." Holmes simply smiled, as if the prospect of death had never been enough to deter him. The secret hidden within the pages. Gregory gestured for us to follow him into a small back room. It was cramped and dimly lit, with stacks of books haphazardly piled along the walls. He rummaged through a shelf, then pulled out a small wooden box from a hidden compartment. Opening the box, he revealed an old notebook, its leather binding worn with age. "This is one of the last things Arthur Winslow left behind. I kept it because I knew that if his killer found it, they would destroy it." Holmes carefully picked up the notebook, flipping through its pages. The text inside was a chaotic mix of notes, sketches, and, most intriguingly, coded symbols. I frowned. "What do these symbols mean?" Gregory swallowed. Arthur Winslow, or rather, Henry Blackwood, was not an ordinary man. He was once part of a secret organization. A chill ran through me. A secret organization? Yes. One that operates in the shadows, with power that surpasses even the government. Arthur Winslow was not just some nameless man, he was a fugitive. Holmes continued flipping through the notebook, his sharp eyes gleaming with excitement. "And these notes, they are evidence." Gregory nodded, his voice laced with unease. "He told me there were 3 notebooks in total. Together, they contained the complete truth about that organization. If someone finds all 3, they will know everything." My pulse quickened. "But what about the 3rd notebook?" Gregory shook his head. "I don't know. Arthur never told me where it was." Holmes was silent for a long moment before finally closing the notebook and slipping it into his coat. "Mr. Gregory, listen to me carefully. You need to leave this place immediately. If you know anything about the 3rd notebook, the killer will come back for you." The old man stared at Holmes, fear evident in his eyes, but then he nodded. "I will do as you say." Holmes turned to me, his eyes gleaming even in the dimly lit room. "Watson, we are closer to the truth than ever. But that also means, the killer is getting closer to us." I swallowed hard, a shiver running down my spine. This was no longer just a simple case. We had stumbled upon a secret so dangerous that people were willing to kill to erase it. And now, we had become part of the game. Outside, London's fog remained thick, swallowing the streets in darkness. But somewhere in that darkness, someone was watching us. And the game was only just beginning. Chapter 6: The Mysterious Stalker. One thing I had learned after years of accompanying Sherlock Holmes: danger does not always come from what we can see, but from what we cannot, or worse, from what sees us before we realize it. The London night was thick as ink when Holmes and I left Gregory's bookshop. The dense fog wrapped around the narrow streets, turning everything into silent, shifting shadows. The lone street lamp on St. James Street flickered a few times before going out completely, leaving the road in an eerie darkness. Holmes walked in deep thought, one hand tucked into his coat pocket, the other tapping lightly against his side in rhythm with his steps. I walked beside him, my mind still occupied with what we had just learned. Holmes, if this secret organization truly exists, then we have stepped into a dangerous game. A fascinating game. Holmes replied, his tone calm. I was about to say more when Holmes suddenly raised one finger, signaling me to be silent. I froze. Holmes did not turn around, but I noticed his eyes narrowed slightly, focused on the darkness ahead. Watson, we are being followed. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I glanced around, but all I could see was the thick fog and the dim glow of distant gas lamps. Are you certain? Holmes gave a slight nod. He maintains a perfect distance, always at the edge of our sight. If we quicken our pace, he quickens his. If we stop, he waits in the shadows, watching. I felt my pulse quicken. Then who is he? An excellent question, Watson. And I intend to find out right now. A shadow in the night. Holmes suddenly altered his pace and pulled me into a narrow alley between two old buildings. We pressed ourselves against the brick wall, holding our breath. Let's see if he walks past. Holmes whispered. I leaned against the cold stone, straining to listen. The silence was so complete that I could hear the faint drip of water from a rooftop. Then, footsteps. Slow. Cautious. Then, they stopped. I held my breath, trying to make no sound. Holmes gave me a slight nod, a signal to be ready. I knew what he was about to do. Suddenly, Holmes leapt from our hiding spot. But, there was no one there. The street was empty, only the flickering gas lamps and the cold stone steps remained. I hurried after him, my heart pounding. Where did he go? Holmes stood still, scanning the street with sharp eyes. He vanished. The footprint of a ghost. Holmes said nothing more, but I could tell his mind was racing. At last, he crouched down. Watson, come here. I stepped forward and followed his gaze. On the cobblestone street, just at the edge of the curb, was a single footprint. But the strange thing was, there's only one footprint? Holmes smirked. Exactly. A person cannot leave just one footprint unless he wants us to think he was here when he wasn't. Holmes nodded. Which means, he knew we were following him. He left this on purpose to mislead us. A chill ran down my spine. Holmes, who are we up against? Holmes picked up a small piece of paper, partially buried under the gravel. He unfolded it. Inside, in carefully written handwriting, were the words. Stop now, Holmes. If you don't, the next one will be you. I looked at Holmes. He simply gave a small, amused smile and slipped the note into his coat pocket. Watson, I believe we have just made a new acquaintance. Footsteps in the darkness. We continued walking through the night, this time in complete silence. I knew Holmes was deep in thought, analyzing every detail. Who was our stalker? Was he just a hired hand, sent to frighten us? Or was he part of something much larger? We had no answers yet. But I knew one thing for certain. We were no longer the hunters. We had become the prey. Chapter 7, The Letter Left Behind. In Holmes's world, a threat is never a sign to stop, it is merely proof that he is on the right path. We returned to 221B Baker Street in a tense silence. The London fog still hung thick like a shroud of mystery, while my mind was still reeling from what had just transpired, a mysterious stalker, a single footprint, and a warning note. Holmes opened the door with his usual composure, as if he had just returned from a casual evening stroll rather than from a dangerous pursuit. But the moment the door swung open, I noticed something unusual. A small envelope lay just inside the entrance, shoved hastily through the gap beneath the door. Holmes bent down, picking it up with a glint of interest in his eyes. Watson, it appears we have another admirer. He tore open the envelope and pulled out a small slip of paper. The handwritten message, scrawled hastily, read, "Stop now, or the next one will be you." Just a few simple words, yet they carried the weight of a deadly warning. I felt a chill run through my blood. "Holmes, what does this mean?" Holmes only smirked, his voice disturbingly calm. "It means I can't stop now." A warning or a trap? Holmes placed the note on the table, pulled out a chair, and studied it under the oil lamp's flickering glow. I stood beside him, the unease growing in my chest. "Holmes, if the people behind this have enough power to erase a man's existence, then they could just as easily do the same to us." Holmes shrugged. "That's true. But there's one thing they don't understand, Watson." "What is that?" He turned the note under the light and smirked. "I'm not easily intimidated." I sighed, knowing that no matter what I said, his resolve would not waver. "Fine. But at least be cautious." "Always." Holmes replied, though I wasn't entirely convinced. "Clues within the letter." Holmes carefully examined the note. "Watson, do you notice anything?" I leaned in for a closer look. "The handwriting seems hurried. But aside from that..." Holmes nodded. "Correct. The writing is sloppy, possibly due to haste or anxiety. But what's even more interesting..." He held the paper up to eye level. "Is that the ink is still fresh." I blinked. "Meaning this letter was written and delivered just before we arrived?" "Precisely." A chill ran down my spine. "Which means..." Our stalker knew where we were, knew when we would return. And waited to leave this message. Holmes placed the paper down and crossed his arms, deep in thought. "This proves two things. First, this person isn't just watching us, he wants us to know that we're getting too close. And the second?" Holmes met my gaze, his eyes sharper than ever. "He's afraid." "Who sent the letter?" Holmes moved to the window, carefully drawing back the curtain just enough to peer outside. "If this letter was placed just before we arrived, then the sender may still be nearby." I looked out as well. The street was empty, save for a few distant figures, none of whom seemed suspicious. Holmes turned back to the table, picking up the envelope and holding it up to the light. This envelope was bought at a cheap stationery store. The paper itself is also ordinary, nothing distinctive. I frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means the sender deliberately avoided leaving clues. He wanted to warn us, but not reveal his identity." Holmes reached for his magnifying glass, inspecting the edges of the envelope closely. Then, his expression shifted slightly. "But he made a mistake." I leaned in. "What mistake?" Holmes pointed to a small smudge on the corner of the envelope. "A blot of ink." I frowned. "And that means..." Holmes smiled slightly. "It means the sender used a specific type of ink, not from an ordinary pen, but the kind used in offices or printing houses." The realization struck me. A printing house, just like the ink we found on the note in the victim's pocket. Holmes nodded. "Exactly, Watson. And I believe it's time we paid a visit to the one place that might provide us with some answers." "Where?" Holmes's eyes glinted with excitement. A printing house in London. The darkness before the storm. As I looked at Holmes, I knew one thing for certain: this case was becoming more dangerous with each passing moment. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, but we still couldn't see the full picture. Whoever had sent this warning letter wasn't just trying to scare us, he was trying to silence us. And if Holmes was right, then the killer would not stop at mere threats. We were no longer dealing with just a murder mystery. This was something bigger. Something so dangerous that someone had been erased from existence. Holmes turned to me, his eyes gleaming with intensity. "Prepare yourself, Watson. We are about to enter the most dangerous part of this game." I did not know what lay ahead. But I knew one thing for certain. Tonight, we were no longer the hunters. We had become the prey. Chapter 8, The First Notebook. Identities can be created, and they can be erased, but the truth can never disappear. That night, Holmes and I returned to Gregory's bookshop. This time, we were not there to ask more questions. We were there to find something that could bring us closer to the deepest mystery of this case. The sky over London remained dark and overcast. The dim glow of the street lamps barely illuminated the narrow alleyway leading to the shop. As we stepped inside, the air was still heavy with the scent of old paper and dust. But this time, something felt different. A strange, unsettling presence lingered in the air, as if someone had been there before us. Holmes stopped abruptly at the entrance, his sharp gaze scanning the room. "Watson, where is Mr. Gregory?" I looked around and quickly realized that the bookseller was missing. The last time we were here, he had been terrified just speaking about Arthur Winslow, or rather, Henry Blackwood. And now, he had disappeared under suspicious circumstances. Holmes strode towards the counter and pulled open the drawer. Empty. His brows furrowed. Without a word, he moved to the bookshelf behind the counter, the same place where Gregory had previously hidden the old notebook inside a wooden box. But this time, there was nothing there. Holmes methodically ran his fingers over the spines of the books, as if he knew exactly what he was searching for. At first, I didn't understand what he was doing, but then I heard a faint click, a sound like a hidden mechanism being triggered. I turned just in time to see Holmes pulling open a concealed compartment inside the bookshelf. Inside, an old notebook lay hidden, its leather cover worn and cracked, but otherwise intact. Holmes carefully lifted it, brushing away a thin layer of dust. We found the first notebook. Secrets within the pages. Holmes opened the notebook on the counter, letting the oil lamp illuminate its yellowed pages. I leaned in, feeling a cold chill run down my spine. This was no personal diary, nor was it scientific research. This was a manual, a detailed guide on how to create a perfect false identity. The handwriting was precise and meticulous, outlining step-by-step instructions. How to erase an old identity, from destroying physical records to manipulating administrative databases. How to build a new identity from nothing, choosing a new name, fabricating a personal history, and forging official documents that would be impossible to detect. How to alter appearance and biometric traces, using chemicals to change fingerprints, or surgery to modify facial features. Rules for survival as a new person, how to behave, speak, and even think to avoid suspicion. I took a deep breath and looked at Holmes. What kind of organization is this? Holmes flipped through a few more pages, reading quickly before murmuring. This is no ordinary criminal group. This is an organization that specializes in creating people who do not exist. My heart pounded. You mean? Holmes arched an eyebrow. Watson, have you ever considered the possibility that a person could disappear entirely? Not just fake their death, but be completely erased, leaving no trace that they ever existed? You're saying that Arthur Winslow, Henry Blackwood, was actually someone created by this organization? Holmes nodded. That would explain why no records of him exist. But the real question is, if this organization is in the business of creating identities, why was Henry Blackwood killed? I stared at the notebook, its words almost blurring before my eyes. Maybe he betrayed them? Holmes smirked. A likely possibility. And if that's the case, then we have already gone too far, Watson. Encrypted clues. Holmes continued turning the pages until he stopped at one particular entry. It was written in a cipher, unlike anything I had ever seen, a combination of letters, numbers, and symbols, carefully arranged in intricate patterns. Holmes frowned, pulling out his magnifying glass to examine it more closely. This isn't just any cipher. It's a nonlinear encryption system, possibly the method this organization used for internal communication. I stared at the strange symbols, feeling a sense of overwhelming complexity. "Can you decode it?" Holmes smirked. "Of course, Watson. But what's more important is..." He tapped the page lightly. "This might lead us to the second notebook." A shiver ran through me. "If we decrypt this, won't the organization know we have the first notebook?" Holmes's expression darkened. "And that, Watson, is the moment we become true targets. Closer to the truth." We decided to leave the bookshop immediately, taking the first notebook with us as critical evidence. As we stepped outside, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. Holmes suddenly stopped, his sharp gaze sweeping over the foggy street. "Watson, do you feel that?" I nodded. "Yes. It feels like eyes are on us." Holmes's lips curved into a knowing smile. "Then the game has truly begun." And with the first notebook in our hands, I knew we had uncovered a secret so dangerous that someone would be willing to kill us to keep it hidden. Chapter 9: The Escape of the Man Who Never Existed. A man can change his name, alter his past, even transform his appearance, but no one can escape from their own truth. After leaving Gregory's bookshop with the first notebook in hand, Holmes and I returned to 221B Baker Street in silence. There was no need for words, we both understood that we had stepped into a case that could change everything we thought we knew about identity. Once settled in Holmes's study, he reopened the notebook and flipped back to the coded passage we had found earlier, a complex system of symbols used by the secret organization that specialized in creating false identities. I watched him with concern. "Can you decipher it?" Holmes smirked. "Every code has a pattern, Watson. And I have a theory." He picked up his pen and began jotting notes on a blank sheet of paper, comparing the symbols in the notebook with a standard alphabet chart. I stood beside him, observing his process. His eyes gleamed with rare excitement, as though he had stumbled upon a puzzle worthy of his intellect. Within minutes, he stopped and smiled. "I've cracked it." I leaned in eagerly. The symbols had been translated into a clear message. "Moorland House, the 17th. The second notebook is there." I frowned. "Moorland House? I've never heard of it." Holmes shrugged. "Not surprising. It's not listed on any maps. But if I'm correct, it's an isolated estate in the northern countryside, a place once used as a sanctuary for those looking to disappear. You think Arthur Winslow, or rather, Henry Blackwood, hid there?" Holmes nodded. "If the first notebook explains how to create a new identity, then the second notebook might be a record of those who have used this organization's services. And if Henry Blackwood hid it at Moorland House, that means it contains a truth so dangerous that he was willing to die to protect it." A chill ran through me at the thought. But if that's true, then the killer might know this as well. Holmes grabbed his hat and gloves. "Exactly, Watson. Which is why we must get there before it's too late. Moorland House, the place no one finds." We left London that very night, hiring a carriage northward. The wind whipped cold against our faces as the wheels rumbled over the uneven roads. An eerie sense of unease settled in my chest. Moorland House wasn't located on any main roads. We had to leave our carriage behind and trek across open fields, where the thick fog curled around us like ghostly hands. When we finally arrived, I understood immediately why no one ever spoke of this place. The old estate stood alone in the wilderness, its red brick walls covered in ivy and moss. The windows were shrouded in heavy curtains, and an unnatural stillness surrounded the house. Holmes approached the front door and tested the handle. Locked. He stepped back, scanning the weathered wooden door. Then, without hesitation, he pulled a small hairpin from his coat pocket and inserted it into the lock. Within seconds, a soft click sounded. Done. I swallowed hard. Where did you learn that skill? Holmes smirked. "Every skill has its use, Watson." We pushed open the door and stepped inside. Secrets in the dark. Inside, Moorland House was pitch black, the air cold and stale, as though it had been abandoned for years. Holmes withdrew a small oil lantern from his coat and lit it. The warm glow illuminated the dust-covered wooden floor and peeling wallpaper. "What exactly are we looking for, Holmes?" He moved carefully, his gaze sweeping across the room's furniture and bookshelves. "A notebook. But if Henry Blackwood hid it here, he wouldn't have left it in plain sight." We began searching. I checked the bookshelves, but they were filled only with old, irrelevant volumes. Holmes examined the desk, pulling open each drawer. Then he stopped. "Here it is." He had found a hidden compartment under the desk drawer. Inside was a leather-bound notebook, identical to the first. Holmes carefully lifted it, brushed off the layer of dust, and flipped it open. The first page made us both freeze. A list of those who do not exist. I shuddered. A list? Holmes flipped through the pages. Inside was a collection of names, each accompanied by detailed notes, old names, new identities, countries, and hidden secrets. Then he stopped at one name. Henry Blackwood, former name, Elijah Graves. I stiffened. Elijah Graves? Who is that? Holmes frowned. I've heard that name before, but I can't recall exactly where. He continued flipping through, reaching the final page. A hurriedly written note stood out. If I die, the third notebook will expose everything. Do not let them find it first. I took a sharp breath. The third notebook, it's still out there. Holmes nodded, his expression grim. And it seems our killer is looking for it, too. A trap in the night. We had no time to think. Outside, a sound broke the silence. Holmes held up his hand in a signal for silence. We listened. Footsteps. Not just one person. Holmes clutched the second notebook, pulling me behind a bookshelf. Watson, we have company. The front door creaked open. A tall figure stepped inside, followed by two others, all dressed in dark coats. I held my breath. Holmes whispered softly. We need to get out of here. I nodded. We began moving toward the back door. But just as we turned, a cold voice echoed. Stop right there. We had been spotted. Holmes gripped the notebook tightly. Run, Watson. Without hesitation, I bolted after him, racing through the darkened room, our pursuers' footsteps pounding behind us. We didn't know where we were going. We only knew one thing. We had the second notebook. And that meant we were being hunted. Chapter 10, The Killer Revealed. Some murderers kill for greed, some for revenge, but there are those who kill simply to erase a name from existence, as if that person had never lived at all. After escaping Moorland House with the second notebook in hand, Holmes and I knew that time was no longer on our side. We now held a secret that could bring down an entire organization, and the killer knew it too. The only question left, who was he? From the entries in the second notebook, Holmes deduced that Henry Blackwood, or rather, Elijah Graves, had previously contacted a pub in Whitechapel. It was likely his last meeting before he was murdered. If there were any clues leading to the killer, they were waiting for us there. The shadowed pub. We arrived at the Black Swan on a bitterly cold night. The pub was dark, cramped, and filled with the heavy stench of tobacco, strong liquor, and lawless men. Holmes and I stepped inside, attracting a few fleeting glances before the patrons returned to their drinks, uninterested. Holmes scanned the room, his voice dropping into a low murmur. Watson, we are not the only ones looking for answers. I followed his gaze, and then I saw him. In a far corner, pressed against the wall, sat a lone man. He wore a tattered black coat, but what made me freeze was his face. A long scar ran from his temple to his jaw, carved deep into his flesh like a permanent brand. He wasn't looking at us, yet I could feel his awareness, the tightness in his shoulders, the rigidity in his posture. He had recognized us the moment we stepped inside. Holmes leaned slightly toward me, his voice steady. "That is the man who killed Henry Blackwood." The eyes of a murderer. I felt my breath slow, my fingers tightening instinctively. "How can you be sure?" Holmes never took his eyes off the man. "The scar suggests an old wound, possibly from a fight or an ambush. But more importantly, look at how he reacts to us." I studied the man again. He appeared calm, but his hand was gripping his glass too tightly, his knuckles turning white. "He's tense." Holmes nodded. "And ready to run." As if on cue, the man suddenly stood up. For a brief second, he glanced toward us, his eyes dark, devoid of panic. There was only cold certainty, the kind possessed by a man who had killed before. Then, he turned sharply and strode out of the pub. "After him, Watson." Holmes darted forward, and I rushed after him. The chase through the night. We burst into the fog-covered streets just in time to see the scarred man slipping into a dark alleyway. "He's heading east, Watson." Holmes led the pursuit, trailing the figure through the maze of Whitechapel's alleys. The killer's silhouette flickered in and out of the mist, but Holmes never lost pace. I could hear the rapid beat of footsteps ahead, quick, deliberate, but not panicked. "He knows the streets," I gasped. "And he knows how to lose us," Holmes responded, pushing forward. We dodged past abandoned carts and leapt over discarded barrels. The man raced toward a brick wall, where only one escape route remained, a back entrance to an old warehouse. Holmes grinned slightly. "He's trapped himself, Watson. Face to face with a killer." We slipped into the warehouse's shadowed interior. Inside, darkness loomed, broken only by slivers of moonlight spilling through shattered windows. Holmes halted, listening carefully. "He's in here." I tightened my grip around my revolver. "Holmes, if he's armed." "He is," Holmes said simply. "But he doesn't know we are too." A faint sound echoed ahead. I lifted my gun, heart pounding. "Who's there?" No answer. Holmes stepped forward, his voice carrying through the shadows. "You can run, but you can't hide forever." Silence. Then, from the darkness, a rough voice spoke. "You don't know what you've gotten yourselves into." I squinted, finally spotting the scarred man, his back against the warehouse wall, his hand gripping a dagger. The blade gleamed faintly. Holmes raised an eyebrow. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with." The man let out a dry chuckle, void of amusement. "Is that so? Then tell me, who am I?" Holmes took one step closer. "You're the man who killed Henry Blackwood. But I don't believe you acted alone." The scarred man tilted his head, as if weighing his next words. "And if I did? Then I need to know who gave the order." A long pause. Then, the man laughed, a hollow, chilling sound. "You think you can dig through this and walk away unharmed?" He took one step forward, the knife glinting. "They've let you live this long. But trust me, you won't survive long enough to see the truth." Holmes didn't flinch. "We'll see about that." The man smirked, then, without warning, he threw the dagger straight at Holmes. I shouted, raising my gun, but Holmes dodged just in time. By the time I fired, the man had already bolted through the back door. Holmes sprinted after him, but as we reached the alley, he had vanished into the night. More questions, greater danger. I turned to Holmes, breathing heavily. "He got away." Holmes nodded, but there was no frustration in his face. "It doesn't matter. Now we know who he is." I stared at him. And? Holmes smirked, his eyes flashing in the darkness. And now, I know who he works for. We had seen the face of the killer. But the case was far from over. Because behind him, there was someone else. Someone even more dangerous. Chapter 11, The Second Notebook. An identity can be erased, but the past never truly disappears. After our encounter with the mysterious killer at the pub, Holmes and I knew we were dealing with a force far greater and more calculated than we had imagined. The man we chased was not working alone, he was merely the blade wielded by someone else's hand. Someone still lurking in the shadows, pulling the strings. But we had one advantage, the first notebook, which held critical information about the organization that created false identities. And we now knew where to find the second, the former residence of Henry Blackwood, the man who once lived under the fabricated name Arthur Winslow. Holmes wasted no time. By early morning, we set out for the last known address where Blackwood had lived before his murder. The abandoned apartment. Henry Blackwood's apartment was located on the second floor of an old building, hidden in a narrow alley in South London. This was not the residence of the wealthy, it was the kind of place where people who wanted to disappear could blend in and avoid unwanted attention. The door was locked, but there were no signs of police intervention or prior searches since Blackwood's death. Holmes crouched down, pulling a small tool from his coat. Within seconds, a soft click sounded, the lock was open. He cast me a glance, smirking. A useful skill, Watson. We stepped inside. The room was cold and empty, abandoned as if it had been untouched for years. There were no personal belongings, no photographs on the walls. Everything about this apartment felt temporary, as if its owner had never intended to stay for long. A man who didn't want to leave traces behind. I muttered. Holmes nodded, beginning his search. He opened drawers, checked under the bed, and even tapped against the walls, listening for hidden compartments. Then, he stopped at an old wooden desk in the corner. The desktop was bare, except for a thick layer of dust. But when Holmes brushed his fingers across it, he noticed something unusual. A locked drawer. Holmes narrowed his eyes, pulling out a thin metal pick. Within moments, the lock snapped open. Inside was a single object. A black leather notebook. Holmes lifted it carefully, his eyes gleaming, as if he had just found the key to a door long sealed shut. The second notebook. The pages that hold the truth. We wasted no time in opening the notebook. My heartbeat quickened as the first pages came into view under the dim light filtering through the window. The first line sent a chill down my spine. Arthur Winslow does not exist, but Henry Blackwood does. If you find this notebook, come to Waterloo Station at midnight. I inhaled sharply. Holmes, what does this mean? Holmes flipped through more pages, his sharp gaze piecing together the fragmented clues. Within the notebook, Blackwood had documented a plan, one I could hardly believe. He was planning to escape. Holmes murmured. Escape? Holmes nodded. Look at what he wrote here, Watson. I leaned in to read. I don't have much time. They've found me. I must leave before it's too late. But I cannot go alone, there are things I need to protect the truth. If you find this, I have failed. Go to Waterloo Station at midnight. Look for the sign of the Iron Bird. I looked up at Holmes. The Iron Bird. Holmes exhaled slowly. A code name. It could refer to a person, or a means of escape. I furrowed my brows. But if he was murdered, that means he never made it to Waterloo Station. Holmes was silent for a long moment before closing the notebook. Watson, there's another possibility. Which is? Holmes met my eyes, his expression more serious than ever. If he left this message, it means he wasn't just running away. He may have left something behind at Waterloo Station. You mean, the third notebook?" Holmes nodded. "Precisely. If we find it, we'll know everything." The midnight meeting. That night, we arrived at Waterloo Station under the cover of darkness. The station was nearly deserted, with only a few workers and homeless drifters lingering in the corners. But we weren't looking for people, we were looking for a sign. Holmes moved slowly, his eyes scanning every sign, column, and bench. Then, he stopped in front of a large iron pillar near the tracks. "Here, Watson." I followed his gaze. Carved into the metal surface was a small symbol. A bird with iron wings. I felt my pulse quicken. "So, what now?" Holmes withdrew a small knife, carefully sliding it under the metal panel where the symbol was etched. With a soft metallic snap, a hidden compartment was revealed. Inside, a notebook. Holmes lifted it carefully, flipping through the first few pages. Then, he looked at me, his eyes filled with something I had rarely seen before. "We found it, Watson." I swallowed. The third notebook. But before we could open it, a sound echoed from behind us. I turned. A gun was pointed straight at us. A shadowy figure stepped forward, his voice calm, yet deadly. "I think you've gone far enough." The secret had been found. But now, the real question was, would we live long enough to read it? Chapter 12, The Trap at Waterloo Station. The most dangerous secrets are not the ones that are hidden, but the ones people are willing to kill to protect. Waterloo Station. Midnight. The London sky was smothered in thick fog, swallowing buildings and winding streets. The gas lamps flickered weakly, barely pushing back the suffocating darkness. Holmes and I stepped onto the train platform, where only a few late-night travelers and station workers remained. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of coal and machine oil, carrying an eerie silence, the kind of silence that swallows secrets forever. Holmes stopped in the middle of the platform, his sharp eyes scanning every darkened corner. "Who are we waiting for?" I whispered, the tension pressing into my chest. "Someone who knows the truth." Holmes responded, his voice steady but firm. "Or perhaps, someone who does not want the truth to be revealed." I swallowed dryly. We had come here based on the instructions in the second notebook. But that also meant whoever was behind all this knew we would be here as well. And if Henry Blackwood had planned to escape from the organization, then perhaps he had left us a clue, or worse, a trap. The mysterious man. The clock tower above the station struck midnight. At that exact moment, a figure emerged from the fog. He wore a long gray coat, his hat pulled low over his face. His steps were quick, but not hurried, like a man trying to appear calm. Holmes narrowed his eyes, whispering, "Watson, watch carefully, does he walk straight toward us?" I followed Holmes's lead, studying him closely. The man did not hesitate or change course. He knew exactly where we were. When he was 10 steps away, he stopped. Then, he glanced quickly over his shoulder before nodding slightly at Holmes. "Do you have the notebook?" His voice was hoarse, as if he hadn't spoken in days. Holmes did not respond immediately. "Who are you?" The man looked around before lowering his voice. "I am the only one left who knows what happened to Henry Blackwood. But if you don't listen to me now, you may not get another chance." There was a raw urgency in his voice. This was not a man trying to bargain or deceive us. This was a man running for his life, a man who knew that death was close behind him. Holmes gave a slow nod. "Then speak." The man opened his mouth, but before he could say a word, bang! A gunshot cracked through the night. A chase in the dark. I froze. Damn it! Holmes didn't hesitate for a single second. The shot came from the west. He took off running toward the direction the bullet had come from, dodging through the startled passengers and panicked workers. I dropped to my knees beside the wounded man, his eyes wide, his breath shallow. "Who did this?" I demanded. His lips trembled, barely forming words. I leaned closer, desperate to catch his last breath. "The black bird." Then, he went still. His lifeless eyes stared at the night sky, his blood pooling on the platform. Rage flared inside me, but there was no time for grief. I grabbed my gun and took off after Holmes. We sprinted through the dark railway yards, the dim station lamps casting long, flickering shadows. Ahead of me, Holmes moved swiftly, his sharp instincts tracking the killer's escape. "Watson, take the right alley," Holmes shouted. I obeyed without hesitation, cutting through a narrow side path beside the station, my gun raised. A dark figure rushed past me, the assassin. He wore a long coat and a low-brimmed hat, moving with frightening agility. Holmes leapt onto a stack of crates, using the height to jump over a low wall, chasing the killer onto a nearby rooftop. I circled around, trying to intercept him. The assassin turned, realizing we were still on his trail. He pushed forward, sprinting toward a narrow passage between buildings. Holmes picked up speed, chasing him to a wooden fence, the only exit. But the killer was too fast. He vaulted over the fence, disappearing into the dense fog beyond. Holmes skidded to a stop, breathing steadily, his eyes scanning the darkness. He can't have vanished that quickly. I caught up, my chest burning from the sprint. He just killed a man in front of us, Holmes. Holmes clenched his jaw. Yes. And he did it to silence the only witness. The remaining clues. When we returned to the station, the police had arrived, as always, too late. The man's body had already been covered, and Inspector Lestrade stood with his arms crossed, looking irritated. "You two again?" Holmes ignored the skepticism in his voice. "Watson, what were his last words?" I exhaled, still catching my breath. "The black bird." Holmes's expression darkened. "First, we heard about the iron bird. Now, it's the black bird." I glanced at him. "Then who could it be?" Holmes didn't answer right away. Instead, he crouched next to the corpse, carefully searching the pockets of the dead man's coat. Then, he pulled out a small slip of paper. Holmes unfolded it, scanning the text, his expression turning grim. He handed it to me. 3 words were scrawled across the note. Waterloo. Final train. A chill ran down my spine. "Holmes, the last train leaving Waterloo is at." Holmes nodded. 3 a.m. And we need to be on it. The unanswered questions. We stood in the station, watching as the crowd slowly faded away, leaving behind only the lingering weight of death. A man who knew the truth had just been murdered in front of us. A killer had escaped into the mist. And now, our only lead was a cryptic message about a train departing Waterloo at 3 a.m. Holmes slipped the note into his coat, his eyes burning with determination. "Watson, we've never been closer to the truth than we are now." I gripped my gun inside my coat. "And we've never been in more danger." We both knew the reality of our situation. We were following a path that had no way back. And whoever was waiting for us on that final train would not let us leave alive. Chapter 13, The Final Testimony. In a man's final moments, the truth is often spoken without hesitation, for it is the only thing left he can leave behind. Holmes and I knelt beside the dying man. Blood spilled across the cold stone floor of Waterloo Station, glistening under the weak glow of the overhead lamps. His breaths were shallow, each one rattling as if his body was fighting for just a few more seconds, to say something crucial before the end. Holmes leaned in closer, his voice steady but urgent. "Who is behind all of this?" The man's fading eyes flickered, his lips trembling. Each word came out fragmented, barely more than a weak whisper. "Find the third notebook." Holmes's fist tightened. "Where is it?" The man gasped, his voice barely audible. "The one behind it all is." A final, strangled breath. His body shuddered one last time, then fell completely still. I placed 2 fingers against his throat, searching for any pulse. Nothing. He was gone. Holmes already knew. I looked up at Holmes. His face remained calm, but I could see the way his hands clenched, the whiteness of his knuckles betraying his frustration. "Holmes." He stood slowly, his gaze locked onto the dark railway tracks stretching into the distance. "I know who it is, Watson." I felt my breath catch. "Are you sure?" Holmes gave a firm nod. "Everything we've uncovered so far leads to only one conclusion. Someone who didn't just want Henry Blackwood dead, but wanted to erase everything he knew. Someone powerful enough to make an entire organization obey without question." A shiver crawled up my spine. "Who?" Holmes turned to me, his eyes like steel. "The only person capable of pulling all the strings, from fabricating identities, to ordering assassinations, to ensuring that every trace of these notebooks vanished." He paused, then said, "The leader of the organization." I stiffened. "You mean?" Holmes smirked, but there was no amusement in it. "The one person no one suspects, yet who has controlled everything from the shadows." I felt a chill pass through me. Holmes had pieced together every fragment of this puzzle. And now, all that remained was the third notebook. The final clue. Holmes bent down, searching the pockets of the dead man's coat. After a few seconds, he pulled out a small blood-stained note. I leaned in, my pulse quickening. On the paper, only 3 words were written. "Final train departure." I froze. "So that means?" Holmes nodded. "The third notebook is on the last train leaving Waterloo tonight." He tucked the note into his coat, then turned to me. "Watson, we have 30 minutes." There was nothing left to say. We both took off running toward the platform. The final train was about to depart. And with it, perhaps the final truth that would put an end to this case once and for all. Chapter 14, M's Confession. Every lie eventually unravels. No secret can remain hidden forever, especially not from Sherlock Holmes. We had the third notebook. It held the truth that Henry Blackwood, once known as Arthur Winslow, had fought to protect with his life. But there was still one missing piece in this puzzle, the enigmatic woman called M. Who was she in this story? Was she truly a grieving widow, or was she part of something bigger? Holmes never left a question unanswered. And tonight, we would uncover the final truth. The final meeting. The last time we had seen M was in an abandoned house, where she had called for Holmes's help. But tonight, she was no longer in control, she was the hunted. Holmes had tracked her to a small house near the Thames, far removed from the chaos of London. A place where someone who wanted to disappear could hide forever. We arrived at midnight. No knocking. No warning. Holmes pushed open the door, and there she was, standing frozen in the dim light, her eyes wide with shock. The flickering oil lamp in the corner illuminated her face, revealing exhaustion, fear, and tension. She no longer had the mystique she once carried. "What have you found, Mr. Holmes?" Her voice trembled slightly, but she forced herself to remain calm. Holmes didn't waste time. "I found the third notebook." She stiffened, as if a dagger had just pierced her chest. I saw her fingers clutch tightly onto the shawl draped over her shoulders. "You were never meant to have it." Holmes smirked faintly. "And yet, here we are." He stepped closer, his eyes drilling into hers, cutting through her silence like a blade. Now, I want you to tell me the whole truth." M turned away, as if searching for an escape. But she knew, with Holmes in front of her, there was no escape left. A heavy silence filled the room. Then, she exhaled slowly, her shoulders trembling. And she began to speak. The buried truth. Arthur Winslow never existed. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but each word felt heavier than the last. I clenched my fists, staying silent. My husband's real name was Henry Blackwood. And he was not an ordinary man. She paused, struggling with her own emotions. But Holmes gave her no time to hesitate. He was an operative, wasn't he? M looked up, startled, before slowly nodding. Yes. Henry worked for them. Them, who are they? Her lips tightened. The people who created him. And the same people who killed him. A chill ran through me. Holmes remained unshaken. What did he do for them? M swallowed, her hands clutching together in her lap. Henry was part of the organization. A secret group that specialized in erasing identities, creating people who didn't exist. He helped criminals, spies, and the powerful vanish from society, giving them new lives, new names. She let out a bitter laugh. But then, Henry made the worst mistake of his life. He knew too much. Holmes stated flatly. M nodded. Yes. She looked down at her hands, as if remembering a painful memory. At first, Henry thought they were just helping people who needed to disappear. But then, he realized they were more than that. The people they were helping were not just criminals, they were politicians, government agents, people who carried secrets too dangerous to be exposed. Her voice wavered. Henry knew that if he stayed, he would never be able to leave. So he chose to betray them. Holmes said softly. M closed her eyes for a moment, then nodded once. He chose to run. But not just that, he stole 3 notebooks before he fled. A shiver ran down my spine. He wanted to destroy the organization. Yes. Holmes crossed his arms, silent for a moment. But the organization found him before he could. M let out a deep breath, her expression filled with pain and regret. They sent a killer. He never had a chance. I gritted my teeth, anger boiling in my chest. They killed Henry. But they still hadn't found the 3rd notebook. M nodded. Yes. And that's why they kept hunting. Holmes's gaze sharpened. And you helped them. She froze. Holmes's lips curved slightly, but there was no amusement in his voice. You knew about the 3rd notebook from the start. But you didn't tell me. You wanted me to find it. M shuddered, but she didn't deny it. Why? I asked. She took a shaky breath, then whispered. Because I couldn't do it alone. She looked up, her eyes filled with desperation. I wanted to end it all. Holmes studied her in silence. Then, he turned to me. Watson, we have everything we need. I exhaled. What now? Holmes looked back at M. His expression softened slightly, there was no coldness left, only understanding. Now, we finish this. The truth unveiled. The truth was finally out. But there was still one thing left to do. Face the one behind it all. Chapter 15, The Fate of the Man Who Never Existed. Justice is a fragile notion, it arrives sometimes, and sometimes it does not. But truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds its way back to the surface. Holmes and I returned to 221B Baker Street after a long and grueling night. The 3rd notebook, the final piece of this dangerous game, lay open before us on the table, its pages filled with names of people who had been erased by the secret organization. I turned its pages, feeling as though I were touching a graveyard, a mass burial site of forgotten souls. Holmes sat silently in his chair, his keen eyes fixed on the list of people who had once existed but had since been wiped from the world. Finally, I broke the silence. "What are we going to do with it, Holmes?" He looked up, his voice calm yet resolute. "We will give it to Inspector Lestrade." I frowned. "But Holmes, you know that many of the names on this list will never be brought to justice." He gave a small, bitter smile, not of amusement, but of understanding. "I know, Watson. But it is not our place to decide who gets punished." I stared at the list. The meticulously recorded names, one after another. It was not just a list of those the organization had killed, but also those who had ordered the killings. "All of them," I murmured. Holmes folded his arms, his voice low and steady. "This is a game played only by those at the highest levels of power. The pawns will fall, but the ones truly responsible, they will continue to rule the world from the shadows." Frustration boiled within me. Then what was the point of all this? Holmes looked at me, his gaze unwavering, yet free of anger or despair. "Truth." I froze. His voice remained soft, but its weight was immense. "Justice does not always arrive, Watson. But truth always remains." I exhaled slowly, leaning back in my chair, feeling as though we had traveled an impossibly long road, only to find that the final destination was not what we had hoped for. "Perhaps you're right, Holmes. But it's hard to accept." Holmes stood, reaching for his pipe and lighting it with ease. "You know, Watson, when I was younger, I used to believe that if I were just smarter, if I tried harder, I could change the world." He took a slow drag from his pipe, the smoke curling in the dim light. "But I realized that the world does not change in the way we want it to. It only changes when truth is known." I remained silent. Holmes turned to me, his expression softer than before. "And that is why we must never stop seeking the truth, Watson." I looked down at the notebook on the table. The names, those who had been erased, those who had been forgotten. "So, is this the end?" Holmes nodded. "No, Watson. This is not the end. This is only preparation for the next case." He smiled a rare, quiet smile, and for the first time in many days, I felt a faint light breaking through the darkness. Because perhaps justice does not come for everyone. But truth always remains. The end.